All right, so we will be building a human-centric metaverse here on stage today with our next two experts on the stage.
Thanks.
Join us for an illuminating fireside chat with Christopher Lafayette and Emmy Award-winning journalist Lisa Bernard. They will venture into the dynamic world of the metaverse, more specifically Christopher's brainchild, GatherVerse. Provide a bit more info here. Christopher is a humanitarian and emergent technologist in virtual and augmented reality, applying his talents to the metaverse, medtech, education, Web3, and applied sciences. He is working for a more equitable culture in technology, serving as a Silicon Valley national and international speaker, thought leader, and advocate for greater expansion of community and technology that includes cross-culture and inclusion considerations. GatherVerse is the brainchild of Christopher Lafayette. Christopher saw a critical need for going beyond the technical aspects of creating the metaverse to include humanity itself in the conversation about what a metaverse can and should be, and how best it could benefit those who will ultimately inhabit it. As the founder of the Black Technology Mentorship Program, he is creating entrepreneurs and professionals of tomorrow through proper incubation and acceleration, career path, and apprenticeship. Christopher has worked with and advised companies and organizations such as Google, Meta, the NFL, Merlin Entertainments, the European Commission, Nico Hotels, the NBA, Linux Foundation, Cisco, Microsoft, Salesforce, Verizon, Stanford University, Duke University, San Jose College of Engineering, UCLA, renowned chefs, musicians, and hundreds of startups. He sits on various advisory councils and boards. He's bringing thousands of communities and millions of people into the metaverse and emerging technologies humanely. We're also joined by Lisa Bernard. Lisa Bernard is a television reporter and host whose work has been recognized with 3 Emmy Awards and 5 additional Emmy nominations. Lisa is a host and producer of GatherVerse News. GatherVerse explores the intersection of humanity and emerging technology. Lisa interviews leaders in Web3, AR, VR, XR, AI, the metaverse, and other emerging technologies about humanity-first standards of accessibility, education, equality, community development, safety and privacy, wellness, and ethics. She has worked as a national network correspondent for Al Jazeera America, Bloomberg TV, and MSNBC. She was a reporter and fill-in anchor with NBC Bay Area for 10 years. Prior to that, she was a reporter at TV stations in Chicago, Boston, Indiana, and Iowa. She has served as a host on the social media app Hi-Ho. Lisa is also an award-winning filmmaker. She wrote and produced the feature-length documentary The Push, which won multiple prestigious Best Documentary Awards, including the Santa Barbara International Film Festival and the San Diego International Film Festival. She worked on the critically acclaimed Bat Kid Begins documentary. She has served as an assistant director on a number of short films. Lisa has done long-form television pieces on human trafficking. She went into California's San Quentin prison to report on a college education program for the inmates. She was also granted unprecedented access to IBM's Watson supercomputer and its beta test phase to reveal how it could help treat cancer. Lisa reported on Honeywell's airplane laboratory, storm chasing from Seattle to North Dakota to test a new weather radar system, and she flew a small plane on camera for a feature story to confront her fear of flying. She has extensively covered the same-sex marriage debate, the Balco steroids scandal, and the loss of United Flight 93 on 9/11. Lisa is a guest lecturer at the Academy of Art University in the Graduate Broadcast Journalism program. Thank you both for being with us today. Looking forward to your conversation. And here we go. Thank you.
Thank you for that intro. Thank you. And thank you, Christopher, for sitting with me up here today. So your mission at GatherVerse and your personal passion, because I know you and I know this is your personal passion, is to explore and insist on a human-centric approach to the metaverse, to emerging tech. So I want to start let's get right into it. This week, more than 400 people signed a one-sentence statement. Many of you, I'm sure, are already aware of it. It was released by the Center for AI Safety. I'm going to read it aloud again just for emphasis, even though, as I said, I'm sure you all saw that this week. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. What are your thoughts on such a dire warning?
Sure. I'd first like to express that probably the majority of us that have had the opportunity to attend AWE this week really aren't in a position in terms of the magnitude of expression on what we're dealing with when it comes to regenerative technologies, when it comes to artificial intelligence, and with what we see with leadership in this world and those that have really played an active role in developing and creating these large language foundational models, for them to give such a warning and such an alarm, we find ourselves at the precipice of probably the most potentially disastrous and alarming confrontation unlike anything we've ever seen before throughout the ages and dispensations of time itself. It's because there was a time where there were those that not considered the magnitude of what the Manhattan Project would ultimately become. And when we start thinking about warfare, we tend to think about the biggest threat that we all can imagine and think of beyond any natural occurrences of a solar flare or a devastation by way of an earthquake or a devastation by way of a volcano, if you will. But we tend to almost acquiesce into nuclear warfare. But we need to start thinking about how dramatic this already is when you have these leaders, and not just leaders, but people that have actually developed these technologies are saying, hey, there's a really big deal. When Professor Hinton, who's probably arguably the most brilliant mind in artificial intelligence on the face of this planet, who created the backstrap propagation in order for us to be able to appreciate generative pre-trained transformers, and you have Ilya Sutskever, who is the CTO of OpenAI, who probably is the one that most likely, and what is to presume to be the one that fashioned and created GPT 3.5, GPT 4, subsequent oncoming GPT 5. He studied under Professor Hinton. And so just literally a few weeks ago, and I was in Europe at the time when he made the announcement that Professor Hinton stepped down from Google to be able to be at liberty to express openly how he feels about what is about to happen, what we're on the verge of, and what's the potential magnitude of what we're looking at when it comes to the potential destructive devastation of what could happen by way of this technology getting into the hands of the wrong type of people, organizations, or military armies. But here's the bigger deal of consideration, is that when we look at nuclear warfare and nuclear threats, and yet we're having this type of discussion at this technology conference. When we look at it, that's not the thing that really gives me the most pause. What gives me more enhanced pause is that we are never been this close to be able to unlocking and to be able to deconstruct to some degree on the line of physics. It's not that GPT is going to be able to itself cause this cataclysmic destruction. It's that these technologies have been used as tools to be able to enable and to be able to construct, unlock, and really in some ways, we talk about regeneration, but we haven't spoke as much about degeneration. They have the capability to be able to force multiply and to be able to change the way that we look fundamentally at warfare itself. So what happens when we have those that not create some super nuclear weapon, because there's already a lot of nuclear weapons, because how are we quantifying, defining disaster? Well, let's look at this a little bit different on the dichotomy scale. That what happens when one of these superpowers in this world, or non-superpowers, but let's acquiesce to the superpowers, has the capability to be able to deter a nuclear weapon, while they have a usable arsenal of nuclear weapons available. What does that mean when we talk about alignment with artificial intelligence? Because that's the biggest concern when we're talking about today's AI, is alignment, meaning, will artificial intelligence align ultimately with human values? But if so, whose values? Vladimir Putin's values? Xi Jinping's values? So if you have this much capability to be able to have a nuclear arsenal which stands still to almost the ultimate threat of society today, and everyone's at a stalemate, if you will, what happens to the one country that has the potential to be able to stop you from using that arsenal? What would and might that look like as we continue to move forward? And so not only are we not at a dangerous time, and we tend to think of the danger of massive job loss, because there will be massive and dramatic job loss that's coming down. When you looked at some of that very heads that are building this technology that goes to Congress just 2 weeks ago, we're not saying 2 months ago, 2 years ago, a year ago, just 2 weeks ago, And Senator Dick Durbin asked this cohort that came to them and said, hey, we're going to need government regulation. We're going to need law enforcement. Sundar Pichai comes on into an interview, CEO of Google, and says, hey, we need the help of law enforcement. Why are all these technologists and CEOs of these major, biggest companies in the world, bigger than US Steel, bigger than oil, are saying all of a sudden we need to create state departments to be able to regulate the magnitude of what we have unleashed into society? And Senator Dick Durbin said it so appropriately, wait a second. We on the Senate and in Congress are used to being able to chase down those in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to be able to help keep them accountable. We've never been in a situation where you are coming to us and asking for our help, which lets us know that public sector hasn't even had the ample opportunity and the time to be able to wrap their mind around the magnitude and the enormity of what we're facing here, because the cadence of technology has now accelerated and the tempo of technology has now accelerated. And we're at a point where legislators can't legislate, policy cannot create policy because it's moving too fast. And as I said 2 years ago, what happens when the technology becomes more advanced than the technologists? I said, now that has come to pass, and that is where we find ourselves at now. And so when we come to different organizations, such as Augmented World Expo and others, and I've been traveling around the world having these discussions with audiences that are much more locked in, we're not used to having these types of discussions that are happening, whether we're talking about safety and privacy that was expressed this morning, or whether we're talking about biometric data readout and what that means in terms of agency and autonomy and who owns your likeness and image now that it's been captured into a virtual ecosystem. Who owns your autonomy? Who owns your human eye resolution scale body itself? And so we're talking about these issues on the day 3 of AWE, but to me, these are day 1 conversations that we should be having. And so to some degree, and I sit on the council of AWE with good respect for my dear friends here, is that these narratives are now outgrowing this particular venue. And so now it's time for us to be able to move forward in some of those things that we're working with when it comes to GatherVerse and being able to amplify these narratives and discussions.
Well, exactly. I was going to say, short of extinction, which is, of course, the ultimate worst end game, your work at GatherVerse really is talking about safety and ethical standards and having standards in these emerging tech worlds. Where do you think the state is in terms of, like you're talking about trust, personal privacy, identity, accessibility, equality? There's a lot of work to do.
There is a lot of work to do, and I've just dedicated my whole entire career and my life path when it comes to dealing with humanity first standards, because I believe that we must start to take in consideration that we've gone from an ideative state of understanding to hardware development into software. But for whom have we been ideating and developing and building hardware and software for in the first place? Yet, but for humanity. And if for humanity, for what reasons? For sustainable purposes. And so when we start to think and preservation, but when we meet at this intersection, this very dynamic and very powerful intersection of humanity and emerging technologies, what we are finding is that we are in a very, very difficult and transitionary time that we find ourselves in. When we think about great technologies through the ages of dispensations like the print press that was released in the mid-15th century, that, believe it or not, changed the way that whole entire countries and organizations and businesses operated. And at that time of this innovation, if you will, there was a great degeneration. You know, we often talk about regenerative technology, but I think what's happening is that that is only a single variable equation when most of society hasn't really come yet to the full dawn of the appreciation of the other multivariable equations that go into generative technology itself, because you have progeneration, degeneration, and regeneration. In order to be able to grasp the magnitude of what we're looking at when we talk about the introduction of regenerative technology, we must understand that in order for society to be able to take advantage of regenerative technology, there has to be a degenerative technology. In other words, disruption. That good technology is superseded by great technology, and great technology is superseded by even better technology, is what we commonly refer to here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, transmetropolitan, as disruption. that all emerging technologies abide within the greater ecohabitat of artificial intelligence inflated by machine learning and deep learning and smart systems and neural networks, if you will. And then we start thinking about XR technology and virtuality and augmented reality, physiohaptics, haptical systems, and all the things that have to deal with hyperrealism. And then we start thinking about crypto assets, really firmly under the banner of Web3, if you will, or 2.5, centralized to decentralized, DeFi, DAOs, dApps, NFTs, and all these technologies abide within this ecohabitat, and they're all beginning to scale. But what happens when these technologies begin not only to scale, Lisa, but pair together? This is what was thought to believe that we were looking at on amorphous scale as the construct or the fundamental construct of the smart city. But now what we're seeing is we don't completely understand what we're building right now because of all that has been happening and it's intertwined ecologically within this ecosystem. However, being that good technology is superseded by great technology and great technology is superseded by even better technology, what we're seeing is that the greatest disruptor to contemporary time has not been technology. It's been a pandemic. That we have become more virtual in the past 33 months than we have the past 33 years, and we're not going back. And now that we're seeing these alarming rate rises of NFTs, multi-billion-dollar industry, multi-billion-dollar generation, multi-billion-dollar theft, when we're seeing crypto assets challenging the bedrock foundation of fiat currencies, that is a really big deal. And so government hasn't even completely caught up with that over the past 2 years. Now all of a sudden, now comes the distribution of AI. But why now? Why are we seeing these large language foundational models coming out? Well, one of the reasons is that OpenAI and other different platforms do not possess enough use case potency to be able to create internally with their ecosystems. And so what they've had to do is distribute out these large language foundational models to the greater population to the world to be able to understand what it means to use this technology by directly connecting it with more abundance of human intelligentsia. So now all of a sudden, what they really have been serving as the intermediary of delivering and distributing pots and pans to us, the chefs of society, looking with great anticipation of the dish that we may cook. But here's the problem. This is a dish you may not be able to come back from. And we say this with a half-empty room. I say this on camera. I know that people will see this later. But the reality is sometimes things do not matter until it begins knocking on our own door. And then it begins to matter. So one of the reasons why we created GatherVerse, which we now have tens of thousands of people in our communities, is because I saw the real need and the desire to raise the flag of humanity and for us all to stop and consider for a moment for whom and why are we building and what are we about to hand down to our generations to come, because we have inherited largely what we've received from our seniors, if you will, when it comes to the baby boomer generation that is about to retire widespread within the next 7 years. Gen X is next, Zennials are next, then we have millennials, then we have Z, Y, and Alpha. What are we about to hand down to them, Lisa, is a really great concern. And so the considerations on a very rudimentary level of accessibility, education, community development, safety, privacy, wellness, and ethics is something that should be at the forefront of everything that we're talking about when it comes to building public, private sector, and startup. Why? Because if we don't pay attention to these things, if we don't deal with it now, we will not be able to enjoy our new Apple headsets, Vario, and HTC Vives, because we will be coming out of a difficult situation and heading into a much more difficult situation. Listen, we just came out of a pandemic. Do we really want to go back to business as usual? Have we really learned a lesson from what we just experienced over the past 36 months? And so these are really legitimate concerns, and I have a real fear that it's going to start knocking on a lot of people's doors, and they're going to think about some of the things in the narratives that our community and leaders and organizations such as XR Guild or VWS and others and XRSI of what they've been raising these alarms for, and that it may be on the precipice of being too late.
That's what I wanted to ask you is, do you feel this message is being heard? Do you have any confidence in Congress and in the people who are creating the new tech and producers, executives?
I believe that it's being heard by some people, but certainly not enough people. When you start to think about this, in some ways, this degenerative state that we're in right now, where we'll see lack of jobs and positions, and ultimately it leads to the ultimate demise of mankind, if you will, if they cannot support themselves and sustain within these ecosystems that we were birthed and born into, which is going through a transition itself, going from an industrial age way of thinking into an information age way of thinking into what is next, going to the application renaissance, which is coming to where we're at right now, which is the post-pandemic era of technology and technical development and build. Do I think enough people are hearing this? No. I do believe that every government on the face of this earth needs to start considering UBI, or universal basic income, to be able to help sustain their own societies for whom we vote and bring them into in the first place, but there's not enough being addressed with that. So the answer is emphatically no. There's not enough people, not enough hearts and minds involved. However, with that said, widespread, there are enough advocates out there to be able to do something about it. And here's the deal. We continue to say we need more frameworks. We need more. There's enough frameworks out there already. At the end of the day, the problem is there's a lack of financial access to be able to implement these tried and tested and vetted frameworks that leads us to more sustainable meanings. That is the problem. There's not enough deal flow and capital and belief from those that do have the financial wherewithal and the means to be able to fund these initiatives, and we'll find ourselves in a very dramatic situation soon.
So in our last few minutes, let's try to end on a positive, optimistic note, because it is really, we're at a crossroads. How does tech have the potential to make us more humane, to make us more kind? I know it's in there.
It is, and this is, for me, probably one of the only very limited silver linings that are available is that, listen, and really hear what I'm about to express to you, is that we now have available such an access to democratized availability of agency for us to be able to build our own platforms and to be able to develop, because we're certainly going into a new renaissance of innovation, because people can't get jobs and careers, so they have to build. But we now have available access to technology that we've never had available before. To me, this is the time of human centricity and community centralization, and to be able to create sustainable financial models that run within that layer 1, layer 2, and fiat distribution and reception for buy, sell, and trade ecosystems, so that you can render out and to be able to ultimately consume real world commodities. This is a complete, entire different way of thinking, because the system that you operate in today is about to be disrupted. This is what we do here in Silicon Valley. We disrupt. And whether we want to appreciate the magnitude and the order of what AI is doing, to me, the suggestion and the silver lining is to embrace agency and autonomy and to be able to build, because right now, we don't have enough inclusive culture. We don't have enough gender activity. We have really, in some ways, forsaken a large part of the world when it comes to accessing the data that we're wildly and so happy to be able to use with AI. So whose data are we actually using when it comes to bettering our own lives? If we start to think about human centricity in its rawest form and the expression of art, that comes from humanity. And we know that people don't buy products and services, they buy culture, Simon Sinek. So my question is to you is, what is your culture? And what are you going to be contributing with the time that's given? And there may come a time where you don't have a plan B to be able to exercise. And that's perfectly okay. But right now is the time to be able to work on your own volition with what's available to us, and to be able to apply the energy for what's coming in the future, near future, because we've never seen a thing like this happen before. And I can assure you, and you could take this to the bank, this time next year, on June 2nd, will be completely different from anything you've ever known when you look at the face of technology. And hold me to that, and we'll see whether that's so or not.
I think you're right, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that great talk. Any question? We have time. You're the last session in this room.
Do you want to take questions?
Questions, comments?
Sultan, so I'm a district leader in Harlem for the 70th Assembly in New York State. And I work on legislation with 3 states, Rhode Island, Maine, Pennsylvania, because we can't get anything pushed through the New York Assembly. Question I have is kind of simple, right? So we operate in 3 things. There's opportunities to testify, there's opportunities to put comment up, and then we write the bills. How do we get better engaged with a lot of the Silicon Valley leadership in a way that we can actually affect positive change and get some of the education to legislators? Because right now that's not happening, and that hasn't been happening for a very long period of time.
Sure, and that's one of the premises of GatherVerse is we gather and organize leadership, we gather and organize organizations and leaders of those organizations and people that build within that so that we can be able to create a peer-to-peer platform of expression and amplification to be able to become more better identifiable as a ready point of resource so that those that are looking for those that are actually building these technologies can be discovered for a point of reference. I think that's one of the biggest difficulties when it comes to the intersection of legislation and technology is that they don't have good enough information that's reliable and that's solid for them to be able to simply do their jobs. And that's turning into a really big problem, especially when it comes to the courts and passing law. It's a good question.
I can't help but see a mirror kind of with the psychedelic revolution back in the 60s. And it was, the younger generation moving into the new frontier, and then mainstream older America kind of pushing back out of fear. And it was a time of experimentation and then move forward into the future. Now with more information, we kind of see psychedelics coming back up as a way to treat individuals with PTSD, et cetera.
Sure.
Do you think it's possible that now is kind of just a time to get over the hump of experimentation, and then years down the line, it can be implemented in a better way, as similar with the now implementation of psychedelics in a safer way, so to speak?
Sure, I do. I think to your point, to the essence of it, if you take the psychedelics and look at what we're able to do with ketamine and seeing that, and when it comes to wellness and practices, I believe that if we are able to, again, create more agency in those that can be able to, in a very fine vertical, to be able to, one, keep up with the cadence and the expectation of what's being delivered for consumption, then sure, I believe that you can. But the difficult part about that is that some of these availabilities already exist. But it's difficult to find because we don't have enough market volume in this world to become existent. So there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of processes and methods, and there's a lot of platforms that exist that have incredible intention, but they really serve the benefit of a rock in the garden. They don't grow because they don't have the viability and availability to be seen. And so a lot of people are hidden in places beyond the pine, if you will. And so the idea is that we cannot forsake our marketers and our marketing community that help really shine a light on what is needed as opposed to what we desire. And that's part of the problem with media psychology and the entanglement therein is that most of the marketing is focused on things that what we want to be sold and less on what we actually need for sustainability. And we continue to consume things that really are more so, really frankly, leading us to more of a stagnation than an accelerant fashion. It's a really good question.
Awesome. Chris, you had mentioned earlier about the layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and the fiat. Can you go a little bit more low level on that?
Sure, I believe that we're heading into an animate economy to where it becomes more virtual because now we've discovered that we can have whole entire organizations and companies sustain within these virtual spaces. There's been great contestation, not just here in Silicon Valley, but elsewhere around the world, transmetropolitan, transcontinental, that people don't want to go back to work in the ways that we used to. when we think about what we do and operate within these virtual ecosystems, you think about the massive rise of NFTs, if you will. Why did all of a sudden did they rise the way they did? Stratospheric in 2021, being that they were around their nativity at 2011, BitDNS, Color Coins Counterparty, Ethereum 2015, but they've always been on the scene. But why now? It's because we've discovered ways that we could communicate, we could distribute by way of the cloud, and we can be able to now do more with that in terms of buy, sell, and trade. And so when I think about the layer one in terms of blockchain technology, with the distributed timestamp ledger, in comparison and contrast to being able to use fiat currencies, crypto assets, meme coin, altcoins, you can expect to see, once we find complete end-to-end when it comes to those that develop and that curate commodities, we can expect to see more of this type of activity, not just for digital assets, but for things that are more life-sustaining. So really the farm-to-table narrative, but farm-to-door, that I can go and buy from. Imagine if I could be able to create a whole hyper-humanized resolution field, if you will, of produce, and to be able to not astral project myself, but be able to, by way of telepresence, go into this field, choose specifically in real time the produce that I want, and that farmer, she or he is willing to be able to accept my crypto asset. That's based on my native community of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. They accept this crypto asset, and in turn to be able to send not farm to table to someone else's table, but farm to my door. Now I'm starting to disrupt the way that I shop and start to disrupt the way that I actually sustain. And so we need to start thinking about how we interact with society on these new terms with these technologies that have risen. But it's been moving so fast that hasn't had enough time to iron out yet. But I do believe that it will, and we're starting to see examples of that, which is really exciting.
Chris, you talked about UBI. You touched on that. Do you think we've outgrown capitalism? And do you think that, what would that look like?
I don't think that we've outgrown capitalism. I don't think that we've outgrown the need for centralization. I know a lot of people that are for decentralized governments and organizations completely just say we completely are moving out of the way of centralization. That doesn't really make sense to me. I believe that we need to wear a hat of a both and. Capitalism certainly has its benefits. It's a tried and tested, vetted model for years. I think the problem with capitalism is the corruption therein.
Any other questions?
Hi, Chris. Hi, Lisa. I'm your big fan. That's in the GatherVerse. Recently, I found that I come from China, and I have my own religious background, which is Buddhism. But after I came to America, I built relationship with the local church in Eugene. And I found the people in the church, they are really friendly and really nice. But like when people talk about religions, about their perspectives, the environment gets intense. Yeah, and it's like making people feel sensitive. And I found that like in the history line, we probably need another renaissance, like just because Web3 is coming, like I think it might be an opportunity to break through the barriers between religions. And as they said on the stage last night, and they said like, when we put on device and we take it off, we can be better human. That's their goal. And they more focus on the nature, like to solve the problem in the nature. So like, all in all, like, doesn't matter the religion, what a religion is, but we more focus on we are human beings, like in this three-dimensional world. So, like, how do you think, like, is there any method maybe can solve this problem by imply the technology right now? Like, do you have any idea to solve this kind of problem?
I think you touched on something that's very sensitive, and I'll be short with my questions so that people can be able to get home, and I'll be short with my answer and reply is that I believe that most of this technology that we see developed today is based on an innate sense that people are in discovery of the universal source substance, limits and bounds of everything, of life itself, on a macrocosm and on a microcosm. When we start to take about 70% of what we don't know, dark energy, and then we look at the 20% of the dark matter and 5% of the baryonic energy that we do know that exists, but we still haven't even completely discerned that. We want to understand that by way of physics, what is out there, and to be able to unlock this mystery. A lot of people widespread still don't have a great sense of what the singularity is, and it's a great contestation of debate. You look at the hallowed halls of science and the hallowed halls of religion at great contestation through the ages and dispensations of time, but they're all on the same page to want to know exactly what is it so that one can prove who's right or who's not. Mm-hmm. The problem is, in the endeavor of this, is there's tremendous and great sacrifice that's being happening at the behalf of the people to be able to find out these answers, to be able to unlock physics. At the end of the day, to me, is that I think that we should turn all of our eyes inward and focus on what's happening within inside. It's either you're dealing with darkness or light within, and to be able to find happiness within ultimately, because none of these technologies, none of these platforms are going to be more self-sustaining to what externally to us to be able to bring happiness within than what we can find that could be perhaps already innate within us all. And so at the end of the day, I feel like religion, it's already been disrupted through the ages and dispensations, and we're seeing some of the outcomes of that. Am I saying it's a bad thing? No, I'm not necessarily saying that in total. But what I am expressing to you is that find happiness within, outside of anything that can be built by mankind, because sometimes we may have to appreciate that the very thing that we're looking for has always been with us, right under our noses.
Thanks, Chris. GatherVerse number 1.
That was a great way to end this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Lisa, for your time.